Hello, 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 and welcome back to The World is Storytelling with me, Ronnie. Happy 2025, and thank you for listening to us. Now, to celebrate the start of this new year, we have a bumper episode for you. 30 minutes of storytelling joy with the amazing Professor Danny Dorling. Him and I had a phenomenal conversation a while ago about stories, about why an academic as famous and as successful as himself believes in stories more than anything else. So, enjoy the next 30 minutes. And before we get going with the episode, why did the horse cross the road? That's right, to see the neighbours. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful 2025. All the very best.
So tell a story, one that is true. Yeah.
So I'm a boring old man. I can't write about future population in 50 years' time without an idea at least of what the trends are, and I can't see them myself because my inherent positionality is so utterly awful.
Go on.
Well, I'm from another generation.
Right, okay, fair enough. I see what you mean.
I had 3 children. So, like what I don't know about relationships is really interesting. I've got no idea what it's like to be single between 18 and 28. I wasn't. And that was really rare. And that's my Newcastle time, which made, in a way, Newcastle more fun for me because it wasn't a series of my contemporaries were doing a lot of going out to nightclubs and trying to pull. Yeah. And if you're not trying to do that and you observe it, it's actually quite painful.
Was it the big market still then?
Yeah, I've been there recently. And the big market, seriously, because it's all contracted now because of economic decline.
Yes.
But the brilliant thing about a big market now is there's only 2 coppers outside because when you go into a club, they've knocked all the doors so you can then go to another 6 or 8 clubs without having to go on the street again. So once you're through security, and they're all different, there's live music. Seriously, big market has got a huge amount to recommend itself for the older age group.
I'm glad,
But I did end up at 2:30 in the morning on the top floor of what clearly was probably a gay bar, very drunk, explaining to a series of young men with a friend some weird academic concept when clearly the young men who had only just met each other were wanting to spend more time with each other. And my friend pulled me away and we went... But they were just very socially nervous, otherwise they wouldn't have ended up talking with me.
What were you trying to explain to them?
Something to do with mortality rates or something. Completely and utterly embarrassing. Like, really stupid.
Can I use the term cock blocking? I mean, that's what you were doing by talking about mortality rates.
Well, giving them a chance to think more carefully about their considerations about relationships and simply going, yes. They got more time to check out the other person, see how they reacted to this mad old man talking.
Yes, that's very true.
And I love Newcastle. I like the openness to where people are friendly and will even tolerate a weird, pissed academic cramping their style. Yeah. And nobody hit me, And that's my story of Newcastle. For 10 years, nobody hit me.
So, welcome back to The World is Storytelling. The audience, welcome to The World is Storytelling. Professor Danny Dorling, who was here to talk about mortality rates. Yes. No, you were here to talk. I mean, I heard you speaking about a month ago, I think it was, at the Heat Festival, and most of the other speakers were quite technical, very interesting, lots of brilliant people. And you brought both a passion to the stage and a way of looking at the world. And you were talking about population, and you were talking about future challenges for the planet. And it was really refreshing. And when I went to talk to you afterwards, you were very open and you were excited about stories. And then what I found really interesting was when we spoke back and forth by email, I think I asked for your title or something. And you said, well, you just say storyteller.
Yeah.
And, you are, everyone can look at your Wikipedia page and, the list of books you've written and the positions that you have. It surprises me that you put storyteller to the top of that. So tell us the story of why you think you're a storyteller.
I didn't start off a storyteller. I started off very nerdy. I was the last boy or girl to read in my class, so I couldn't read stories.
Oh, really?
Couldn't read till I was 8. Oh, I was told lots of them.
Okay.
My dad in particular was brilliant at reading bedtime stories. He actually enjoyed it. It's very rare to have a parent that actually enjoys reading stories. So I grew up with stories, but I didn't read them until later than other people. And I went to university to do maths and geography and computer graphic. And then I did academic work, which was about measuring things. I did what happens to almost all academics like this in social science. I become de-skilled. I can't use the modern software. It's really hard cleaning data. You get bored of it after a few decades. And so the books I was writing begin to have fewer maps in them, fewer graphs, fewer tables of data, more words. And then the words begin to change, or at least in my case, try to be less dry and more interesting so that somebody will carry on reading them.
Yeah.
Because you begin to realise that people buy your books but don't read them because it's painful to read non-fiction written in a very academic way. But also, it took me a long time to begin to realise that essentially we're just telling each other stories. So it's not just that as a species, one of the things which differentiates us is it's not just language, it's stories. And stories are what we did for millennia. It's that for our brains and our thinking, stories are what resonate, what kind of wake us up to think and be imaginative, to say, do I accept that story? Is it interesting? Do I believe it? Is it telling me something new or not? We're all experts on interpreting stories. It's gossip, the stories are what we spend a significant part of our day doing. And so I came to think that quite a lot of what academia does is present stories into drier way. It's what a medical paper is.
Sure.
Method, data, analysis, result, confidence limits. There's often a small part in these structured papers called discussion, where you're allowed to have a couple of paragraphs where you say what you really think. And not be embarrassed about the fact that we're just telling stories. It's particularly useful if you're trying to get over the point that you're not sure.
Yeah.
We always need people to think and be imaginative, particularly when we're trying to organise ourselves in groups of billions of people. But we only have our age-old mechanism, which is stories that we told around small campfires and in homes. If we're going to be really grand about it, I think the way that I could do that, I think the way we humans actually work quite well is by a diffusion of stories where we come to accept or believe the ones that are most credible, hopefully, if you're positive about this.
Which you said you are an optimist.
I'm an optimist, that the credible stories will win out, which tend often to be the stories of, can't we behave a bit better? Can't we be a bit nicer? We should welcome in strangers. We shouldn't do this and that. I tend to see all religions as a collections of stories which were so pertinent and powerful at a particular time that they become a religion. And they often hold a certain set of truths about human behaviours. So it's like we discover these again and again, which are generally about be nice, don't kill. Whenever a religion comes to the fore, it's not a religion, it's just a truth. So the current religion is this. You're in a temple of it. This is science.
Yes.
It's not a religion, we say. But
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah. But, the temples are the universities. I'm involved in the same kind of storytelling that all previous religious clerics have been. I'm a religious cleric. This is my religion. I believe it. I like universities' objectivities. I don't think they're necessarily perfect places. They have all the hierarchies and power unfairnesses of other religions. But it's our current way of stumbling through and trying, in a sense, like, how can we arrange things so that our children and grandchildren don't live worse lives, live happier lives. And the power of the story is that it can move, which is very different to the power of a politician or political party. It has a robustness. This is my optimism. It has a robustness to it. So if you take the story of polluting too much and just watch that story move around the planet, where is our waste going? What are we doing? It's quite hard to kill that story off. Supposing you're Musk and you really don't want people to worry about waste too much because you don't think it matters because we can colonize Mars. You can buy Twitter. You can even buy publishers, but it's really hard to kill off stories. when you saw me speak, I was in a good mood, which helped. I knew I was the very last speaker of the day. I could see people were tired. I knew I only had 10 minutes, which was a godsend. And so, as a storyteller, I knew I had a job of trying to make sure that people left feeling a bit happy and it was slightly different. I still had something to sell. What's interesting is everybody had something to sell. And my thing to sell was an idea. But also I was there because I was interested in this science festival next to a nuclear secret research site, which, by the way, I drove into by accident, was told to leave.
Really?
Yeah. But I was particularly wanting to be there. I like going to places and talking to groups I don't normally talk to.
Yeah. I find it really interesting what you say. I mean, and it's almost difficult to choose which specific point to go on. But I really loved what you said about ambiguity and diffusion. So story as giving the space for ambiguity and also to diffuse messages through society in a way which meanders so much and can move through osmosis almost, that it's difficult, to counteract, but also has this, what you said, this optimism that it settles in a positive way and in a way which serves humanity.
And hopefully gets corrected. And I'm much more like the story that I don't like the, here's a cannon, I don't know, that's Capital Karl Marx, right? Very, very clever, unbelievably able bloke.
Top marks?
Top marks, not something you'd read to kind of go to sleep, they're not fun reading. But the idea that you treat that as a religious text, I'm generally against treating religious texts as religious texts. Whereas what I like about story is you write one or say one, it's based on other people's stories, and it goes into the world and it's altered by other people. So it's not, here are my brilliant... I hate the idea of great thinkers.
Almost this idea of a round pebble becomes round because at one point many millions of years ago it was a sharp thing, and over the years it just got hit softly as it bumped its way down the river, and then at some point it became this very round, beautiful thing. And perhaps there's something
and it's
similar.
our consciousness, it's our collective, or if you want to complicate it, trying to work out how on earth do we do things as human beings, such as get our fertility rate down everywhere in the world, which we're doing at the moment. We're having less babies. That wasn't some...
Mostly because you block people from coupling up in nightclubs by mortality rates.
It's me doing that. But it's not the Rockefeller Institute and the people who worried about population, and it's not just making sure there are enough condoms in the world for people who want it. It's stories about the changing position of women, that some young woman will hear a story that says you're just as good as a man, and she'll be 12. A story that she wouldn't have heard if she was 100 years or 200 years in the past. And it's our way of changing ourselves as a group of people, and a very large group. You can think about it like music as well. Music and the changes in music. You know, when we were suddenly allowed to have drums and rock and roll, and periods when we weren't even allowed to have a drum beat. And you watch these changes in humanity to do with, and this is telling a story through music, and music is different and more than a story, but it's collective. It becomes about larger hopes, and it's people choosing which music to listen to, which to pass on, musicians choosing which music to copy, what way of doing it, and of course there's always commercial interests and other things, people steering particular stories, which may or may not be good. We end up something which is outside of our individual control, or the control of any country, or the control of any group.
One of the first things you said was your dad telling you stories before you were 8, before you read. What story do you remember? Is there a particular story that you remember which you think was perhaps is still there in the back of your mind for a particular reason?
There are lots of scary fairy stories. He collected second-hand books of fairy tales. Was it the Brothers Grimm or whatever? The European ones, but the originals, 40s, 50s, 60s, kind of unadulterated. And And there's a tradition in children's literature of a good children's book must include jeopardy. Things must be frightening, there must be tension, the world doesn't necessarily work out well. A good children's story is about fear and everything might not be good and the wolf might eat you. Rat's Magic was the scariest one he read out to us. I don't know if anyone could find it. So
Tell us, what is...
Rat's Magic is, although these were incredibly illustrated, it's just the scariest kind of... Nothing bad actually happened.
Okay.
But there is an underlying theme to a lot of children's stories that things may not work out well, but if you work together in a nice, they might. This city has a collection of children's stories which tell you as much about the authors as... So the famous one is Tolkien. He grew up in a particular time. It's a world of maps, good and evil, bad. All bad was from the east, the good to the west.
Yeah.
The elves were particularly pretty. People from the south were dangerous and odd. C.S. Lewis, Narnia, even more overtly, his prejudices about different people. The world
Very religious, wasn't it?
Very religious. Very
The end.
anti-Muslim in the last of the 7 books is pretty awful. But the idea that the world will all be okay if 2 girls and 2 boys who dress up and go to public school and wear ties are in charge of all the animals. That was his idea of what a well-ordered world will be. Philip Pullman, Dark Materials, is sort of slightly more nuanced or different, or it's just nearer our time, so it looks more sophisticated.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And all my favourite HBO's home box office US series is called Rainbow Fish.
Okay,
which is
go on.
a fish with multiple coloured scales who learns to share the scales with other fish. It's an incredibly left-wing children's story in America. The subversion of children's cartoons, things like the clangers, and you can go through... Campbell Green was all about the workers rising up and the boss having to be nice. There's a lot in the 60s and 70s of very early children's TV, which was actually quite subversive, but was the stories. Yeah. And it was slightly maverick people who would produce the Magic Roundabout. I mean, it was a French cartoon where I think the story goes that the people who got it from England literally sat there, projected it onto a back door of some flat in London, smoking marijuana, making up a script. And that is on the BBC. That's my childhood. Okay?
Yeah.
This was the time of Dr. Seuss. I mean, that's longer. And Dr. Seuss wrote his stories deliberately long to force parents to spend longer with their children than they might otherwise choose to.
Really? Was that the...
Yeah, the Cat in the Hat and all these things.
Yeah.
And to learn the set of vocabulary. This was a period when I was born, maybe a majority of people in the world were not literate. And hence, verbal story really, really mattered. So, up until the point that I was a child, most people could hardly read in the world, and at least a tenth of people could hardly read in England. But we have improvements in education, almost everybody can read, incredible technology. Now you talk about Netflix series, and it's more stories going into minds more often. Yeah. Admittedly, through Los Angeles.
I'm going to throw in a question, a bit of a sobering thought on that. Perhaps an overflood. Yeah. That's not the word in English, overflood.
Oh, that overflow's great.
Overflood. Let's call it an overflood.
I remember the flood is the most ancient story. It's a lovely...
Precisely. There you go. It's this overflood of story. I mean, Instagram stories, TikTok stories. These are all used as story, and perhaps there's this people, metaphorically raising their hands above their head, saying, "I'm drowning in all these stories. Just give me one." Yeah. And I wonder if there's a pendulum swing over to that.
Of accepting just one.
And perhaps one which is not particularly nice, not particularly good, but it's clear and it's easy. Yeah. To ask a specific question on that, you teach students, right? What is a story? So instead of knowledge and stats and maps, as you said, what is a story that you share with them that you hope, in the hope that it will diffuse and stay and go and bit by bit?
There's only one story I tell the students here, partly because students are kind of quite programmed to expect a lecture to come in a particular way and they're very worried about an exam. So the only one I indulge myself here, I give one lecture about power and politics in the city of Oxford. I grew up here.
Right.
And I think I've got a licence. And they don't complain about this one. You worry about students complaining. So I tell them as...
Even in your position?
Yeah, you don't want to upset them. And there's a great... Lectures are a horrible format. I really would alter this. We don't alter formats in this university much at all. They still have to. Everything depends on the couple of weeks at the end of their third year where they have to sit at some desks in ancient exam halls. Writing. It's a pretty awful setup. So I do feel sorry for the students. But I do this one lecture where I talk about the city of Oxford. This is a city that they've spent 2 or 3 years in. Yeah. But they only spend it in the very middle. They don't go out. And the city is very small. The University of Oxford tells a particular story about itself. You can see it on the university's web pages. Yeah. It's a pretty fabricated story. And it's actually interesting to look at the web pages and look at the actual wording. Everything is true. But there's no mention of any great academics, because there weren't any. This was a swamp. Nobody lived here. The settlement was up on the hill, in a place that later becomes called Quarry, because it's where the stone was quarried out. It's where the Romans were. There were no Romans down here. There were lots of Vikings around, and so some monks and nuns basically fled and built themselves some pretty low-ranked monasteries and convents at the bottom.
Yeah.
Nothing much happens for centuries. Occasionally somebody who has taught properly at the University of Padua, one of these elite universities in Europe, might come and do some teaching here, and then they're famous, but actually they were the student of the person who discovered vivisection, not the person who did it.
Right.
But then some money begins to trickle in, proper money, which comes from the expansion of the British Empire. And we're in one of the buildings right now. This is an empire building. That's where the money comes from. Yeah. 90% of the university is libraries built from money from the plantations, the biggest plantations on Barbados and so on. So, university expands because Britain becomes richer. Still doesn't do very much. Alice in Wonderland, a book written by a man who may have been a paedophile on a meadow in Oxford becomes the most famous thing at a certain time.
And I notice, not to read the posters, but you've got something that says Allies in Launderland.
Yes.
What is that?
That was somebody who was doing a tour of all the buildings that have been constructed recently, which tend to have the name of a plutocrat on them. Okay. Of which none of whom I will name, because they've got lawyers.
Yes, of course.
But you could look at the University of Oxford and the buildings built in the last 10 years if you wanted a history of where the money in the world is and people who would like to be thought of kindly.
Right.
Slowly, about 100 years ago, you get the beginnings of actually taking the academic side seriously. I tell them very quickly, when the dons, the lecturers, used to have to pretend they were celibate, we finally let them marry. They needed houses with servants, and hence the North Oxford is built. A bloke who later becomes called Lord Nuffield starts a small bike factory, and then the car factory completely changes the city, becomes a dominant industry, is hated by the university, and this constructs most of the housing. The car factory still exists. It produces a mini every minute and 2 seconds, but they're by robots. There are only 3,000 car factory workers. They're homes of what were up to possibly as many with allied industries, 40,000 workers are now occupied and used by the universities and hospitals mainly. And then what does Oxford do? Oxford produces prime ministers, and has done, always did do. And just a century ago, students would arrive, 90% from the aristocracy, with their servants. Yeah. And a few people were being allowed in who were not aristocracy. And then what I try and leave students with, undergraduates, is the idea that we still have Sebastians arriving today. It's just that they're called Zeb. They're from America, and they're doing a master's course. They're just as rich. And they won't necessarily bring their servant with them, but they have delivery drivers and everything else that they need now, and they can live as life as comfortable as Sebastian did. Yeah. And you could argue that the university is just as unequal as it was a century ago. It's just that it's the overseas students with money from the richest families on the planet who have replaced the English aristocracy. What I like about stories is I absolutely am certain that a lot of stories will have changed my worldview, but I can't remember what they were. I remember particular things. Every time I have a bar of soap,
Okay.
or I remember to take some soap if I'm going to a hotel, just soap. I was given to read a book which I think became controversial for some reason, which I can't remember now. And I think the title of the book was called I Am David, and it was about a little boy who escaped a concentration camp.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was about when he first came across soap. He'd never had soap, and washing with soap for the first time. And so every time I open up a new bar of soap, I think of that particular thing. It's very strange, it's very personal. I'm happy to share, but that's the idea. The idea that something as simple as having soap. I always worry a lot about imposing your own ideas. I'm quite a forceful person.
Yeah.
And growing up in Oxford,
Yeah.
I always felt most sorry, this is completely true, for the children of academics. Majority of people who went to my school, their fathers have been a car worker, their mothers have been a housewife.
Yeah.
Never felt they were at ITV apart from anything else. And there's time of great equality. The tiny number of people who had academics as parents, their parents were weird, they were embarrassing. Their parents didn't understand their children. Their parents were not impressed if they did well at school, because of course you do well. And their parents could be, I mean, these people are mostly dying now, so I mean, could be very supercilious and very self-assured of themselves.
Yeah.
And also, I'm quite aware that people tend to want to rebel against their parents. So I rebelled against my dad by smoking.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the thing that's really going to annoy him, smoking at 16? So if I did, I think I didn't tell my children or pick particular stories for a particular message. For that reason, but also because there's a chance that they might grow up being the exact opposite of that, just to show me. So I can tell you a story I was told yesterday, which may be true or may not be true.
Go on.
Okay, well, it was this it's certainly bragging on my part. I was sent a picture of this 7 children book I've just done.
Yeah.
On a coffee table. Well thumbed, read through. The message I got is she's just finished reading it, and just as she finished reading it, she had to phone up JD Vance to say congratulations, because that's the etiquette.
Yeah. Oh.
So that's bragging. Now, I don't know if it's true. I do know I posted to the Deputy Prime Minister a copy of the book. I so very much suspect she didn't phone up JD Vance just after having read it, but that's bragging for you.
Yeah.
But also, that's how small our world is, right? Because I knew Angie 20 years ago. And there's a danger of putting these people like presidents and vice presidents and professors and everything else on these pedestals. They're all just incredibly human.
Yeah.
With lives which, when they make it in certain areas, and the higher they make it, the more of a shock is, they suddenly find themselves being treated like kind of demigods, and suddenly and part of their life's out of their control. You have to do, or there's a set of people around you who say you must do that, or you can't go into that club if you haven't got shoes and a tie on, or wear a gown. I wear gowns now. It's like being made to cross-dress, actually. It's quite, but I don't know. That's a bragging story, but also just do not think ever that anybody in any position, every famous person I've ever met, incredibly human, often afraid at times. Sometimes megalomaniacs and narcissistic, certainly.
Yeah.
The nice thing is meeting them much later in their lives. But
I like the fact that you called Angela Rayner Angie. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor. This has been a fantastic conversation, and one that I would love to continue and could continue forever. Just a point about politicians. I heard Liam Byrne speak. I was at a Bright Ideas gathering a few days ago, and Member of Parliament Liam Byrne talking about inequality, kind of similar things that you speak about, and he spoke very, very passionately And even though it's a topic I'm very much interested in, the thing that I remember is an anecdote he shared about penguin bars. And maybe because I work with story, but maybe it's just such a human thing to hold on to story and use that as our route into ideas. So thank you for taking the time. This is going to be a story too for me, I'm sure, and hopefully for you.
Yeah.
And read all of your books. What's the one which is going to be coming out? That you mentioned at the start, it's going to be coming out next year. You got a contract for it.
Yes, the one next year is called the Next Crisis, and that comes out in May. Oh, and that's a storybook. That's about what is the biggest crisis in the world.
There we go. So look out for the Next Crisis.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Next Crisis as well as the book, The Next Crisis.
So you want to know, don't you? You want to know what's it going to be?
Exactly. But in order to find out, you have to pay. So
that's the bad news.
There we go.
Thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
Some say the old ruins in the sand tell us every story will come to an end. But my dear, we can live what we tell. We are storytelling animals.